Well, good afternoon, friends, and welcome to our next installment of Face to Face with Racism. My name is Jeffrey Moore, and I'm the lead pastor at St. Stephen United Methodist Church, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to our conversation about cultural appropriation and how that functions as a covert form of racism and white supremacy. So I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves as we move through the conversation. We'll start with Jorge Lockward. Welcome, Jorge.
Thank you, Jeffrey. My name is Jorge Lockward. I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic. I served for 17 years as director of a program called Global Praise that tried to struggle with both the mandate we felt of the spirit of interacting across cultures in terms of worship and the difficulties that come along with it. Right now, I'm serving as Minister of Worship Arts at Church of the Village in New York, and this is my kitchen that you see behind me. I think I'd like to offer 4 words, actually 3 words and 1 assumption to kind of get the ball rolling on the conversation. The assumption is a theological one that I hold, and that is that there's a piece of God in everyone, and that means that everyone is incomplete. That we need each other to know God, so that knowing one another and engaging the gifts that God has given to particular cultures is theological work, and it's necessary work. And that there's an arrogance to believe that one culture has all that there is to be known about God. So that's my theological assumption. But then comes the difficult work of how do you do that with these three words that I like to offer. One is power, the other one is relationship, and the last one is messiness. In terms of power, the understanding that there's a power differential, that it's not the same thing to do to appropriate, to use that term, Johann Sebastian Bach, from a German culture to, let's say, a place in England, than it is for Swedes to go to South Africa and collect music and publish it and use it for very good purposes, and they actually were very helpful during apartheid. That collection that we all know, many of us know, I should say. But then all the complications that come with that, because the second word doesn't usually come into play, which is the word relationship. And I want to say that without relationship, there's just no way into incarnation. There is no way into goodness. There is no way into anything other than sin. So to engage something as a way to not relate is sinful, period. Now, messiness comes and helps us because incarnation is messy and difficult, and to expect perfection from it, it's foolish. And I would say it's a part of the construct of whiteness. This idea that we have to do it perfectly or not do it at all. So I offer that assumption, the assumption of we all need each other to know God, and we are all incomplete with one another, and there's a mandate behind that assumption. And these 3 words to us: power, that there's power differentials, and those are at the core of this conversation, I believe, and that there's a relationship, a mandate for towards relationship, and that it's going to be messy.
Well, thank you, Jorge. Now, to keep things orderly and not messy, Darnell and Darrell, would you introduce yourself and offer some thoughts?
I'm Darnell St Romain. I'm the Associate Director of Music at Prince of Peace Catholic Community in Plano, Texas. And I've been there for 7 years now. I've been with the Diocese of Dallas, who's my official employer, for 10 years. Appropriation. It's really hard not to talk about appropriation first if you don't talk about colonialism or imperialism. They're 2 separate things, but most times they're can be interchangeable depending on the context of what you work with. And just in the United States, it's more colonialism. So where you can take something of another culture, claim it as your own, and then manufacture the goods or whatever it is that you've taken and make a profit off. This is another form of appropriation. Make a profit off that and never accredit the original culture for their gifts and their what I want to say, intellectual capacity and knowledge of their invention or situation. We had a situation recently where the 45th president of the United States appropriated splitting the atom and inventing the telephone and inventing the internet as American ideas and culture. And American people did this. I was like, really? Oh my gosh. I didn't know Alexander Graham Bell grew up in the United States. If I remember correctly, he's a Scottish person. You know, these are things, like Jorge said, that is the absolute construction of whiteness. So you can just take what you want as quote unquote good because it was white and make it yours. Then there's the appropriation of music from my culture that certain people sell and make all the proceeds from, and the artists are left with pennies on the dollar. And this is a hard thing too. So power and transaction are what comes to mind when I think of appropriation. There is definitely no relationship. There is no mutual give and take. In order for that to happen, there wouldn't be power. So the mutuality aspect never even comes into play, right? So it becomes consumeristic at some point. And that's why I want to leave it there. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I am Darrell St Romain. I am director of music at Mary Immaculate Catholic Church in Farmers Branch, Texas, also in the Diocese of Dallas. I don't know if I have much to add after Jorge and Darnell, but I will offer this in confronting appropriations and being told what it is, and if you are a person of the Anglo persuasion, please don't get dismissive when it is pointed out. This is hard to deal with because we all want to not deal with the underlying situation and just say, oh, that's just how it is, and that's the way it's always going to be, and you just need to get with the program, assimilate, and fall in your right place. Well, when we confront the issue, it's not that we want to take power away from anyone. We just want to be included in the goods. That's all I have to say.
Okay.
Last. Okay.
Right.
I'm Ryan Forkner. I'm the Minister of Music with Jeffrey and St. Stephen. I'm a public school music educator for the last 16 years, teaching in Mesquite ISD. Some of my thoughts echo what everyone else has said already, and I'm going to be speaking a lot, I guess, from the perspective as an educator, not so much what I'm doing in the church, but what I'm doing in the schoolroom, because there's lots of emphasis and lots of discussion amongst me and my colleagues of decolonizing the classroom, decolonizing music education right now. And as you're talking about the idea of appropriation, and appropriation, just to clarify, we're kind of talking in terms of music, but it goes to iconography, art, ritual, food. I mean, any kind of product of a culture you can think of can be appropriated. Now, some people think like, oh, well, just if I use it, I'm appropriating it. And I think the big thing to talk about is the systemic context in which you're using it. When there is a situation where you have a supremacist culture or a dominant culture to which any other kind of minority culture in the space has to assimilate to, and that supremacist culture can just kind of pick and choose what elements of that neighbor culture they like, or they want to claim, or they want to assimilate. That's when you have that kind of atmosphere that creates appropriation. To create a genuine, what some folks call a genuine cultural exchange, you have to be able to find an actual true multicultural platform where there's not like this overarching umbrella of like, well, let's say America, let's say the overarching dominant cultures, we'll just call it WASP culture, okay? We'll say it's WASP culture, where that's dominant, and then there's all these other ones, and that WASP culture is wanting to interact with the other cultures in very minute points of interaction, take that, use it, claim it. I'm a public school teacher, so I don't get into this stuff, but monetize it, for profit. I don't have any money, but the people who do monetize those things for profit in the movie industry, the music industry, you name it. It's kind of like, you only want part of me, don't you want all of me? When you're talking about trying to find a way in a country that is multicultural, but it's not multicultural in practice. So if you want to establish a real cultural exchange in a country like ours that has people from so many different backgrounds, so many different races, so many different points of origin, you have to find a way to decolonize the situation and set up a space where people of all different cultures feel like all of their cultures accepted and can be celebrated and can be treated with respect in the fact that it's used with context. Jorge mentioned Bach. No one would ever do a piece of Bach without taking the time to study Bach in context and know what the hell they're doing. It's the same with any kind of other cultural piece. If I was trying to do some Colombian choral music, I need to know what that sounds like. I need to know what their common practices are. I need to also know the context in which that music was written and the context in which that music is usually performed, because there's some teachable moments there for everybody to have. So I think that's the biggest challenge as we're trying to move away from an atmosphere where there's a dominant culture that suppresses elements of other cultures, but will take what they want, into a culture where we have a true cultural exchange across the board. So.
Okay. Jorge, any thoughts, responses, questions that have come up? Otherwise, we got some questions on Facebook. But.
This is powerful. Thank you, Darrell, Darnell, and Ryan, and thank you, Jeffrey, for gathering us. I do have one thought I want to offer, which is that let me see what's a good entry point for this. I think that when we focus on the cultural product itself, and I think it is important to do so to a certain level, but and we don't focus on the human being behind the cultural product. There's a dehumanization that happens when you are reduced to a song, or to a sport, or to whatever it is, and so I think that when I think Ryan was very, very right in saying we just want this part of you. For our own benefit, by the way. We're not interested in you. So as one of the things that I use as a measure to judge my own work, my own ministry, is, well, how much real relationship is it building? So because I can, in my head, say, well, I'm just going into music for a minute, using this particular cultural product could be a door towards relationship. Nice. But then you have to do the evaluative piece and say, was it a door? Did something change? Or was it just a self-pleasing exercise where you pat yourself in the back and you say, well, look at me. I did something nice. I opened the door that nobody went through. And it's a high critique for the work that I did for all those 17 years. I wonder, like, okay, yeah, we open doors, but the people walk through them. In some cases, yes. In many cases, no, I would say.
So we end up treating the door as a window.
Well, it's an interesting way of looking at it, yeah. And we and gazing upon people as if it was a zoo, you know, an exotic zoo, and not human beings in equal standing before God with you, and who have something crucial, an element of God that you don't have and that you desperately need. That's the approach that has helped me, at least personally, through these years.
This, I think, relates to a question that John Astle raised. I'm going to put it, I'm sorry, that's blocking your face. John says, we like to say that imitation is the highest form of flattery. How does that square in this discussion? Is imitation different than appropriation? How can one show appreciation for cultural expression without appropriating it? Can one participate in it effectively? Where's that balance between, because I think that's related to kind of the door window issue. Where's the balance between participating out of love, appreciation, that's love is the root of that word, which of course for Christians is a relational word, right? Or the gaze, which is a power dynamic, a power differential relationship to gaze. How do we navigate that without appropriating? I mean, it can't. Ryan, was that your?
It goes back to these. It goes back to these windows that you and Jorge just talked about, because those windows are there. And what I mean by that is, because we have a dominant culture that's suppressing other cultures, that goes into every space. And members of both the dominant culture and the suppressed cultures, they sense that in each space. And that's why there's that window phenomenon. We're like, here's that window where I'm going to look out at you, and where you can look in, where you can bring that culture in. And cultures are always aware of those windows. I'll give you an example. I mean, in my teaching situation, I'm the minority. Most of our students are Hispanic or Black. Okay, and so I'm the minority, and the kids know my feelings about multiculturalism. They know my feelings about the importance of honoring music and doing it in correct context, and the importance for them to learn about each other's cultural gifts and their cultural traditions. That still doesn't create enough of a safe space for them. And what I mean by this is, let's say I say, hey, we're going to have a solo show, okay? And here's the only parameters. I want to hear solos from 1970 to now. I'll have a kid come ask me, like, after class, is it okay if we do a song in Spanish? Is it okay if we do a song in Spanish? Do you know what I mean? Because they feel that overarching. I mean, for a long time in education, you know, speaking Spanish or celebrating Spanish culture, that was suppressed. And not covertly, but like overtly. And they still feel that. So so even if I'm creating a safe space in our little universe, and I'm the minority, but I'm still creating the safe space, they sense that overarching societal cultural domination. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So,
and so dismantling that is how I think you answer the question that John's asking.
Because if you're always,
dome of oppression, you're going to have windows.
Right. I think you've hit on a really important thread that goes through all of these discussions and that we need to constantly keep before us. And that what we're talking about here is systemic. There is, I don't care how well intentioned you are. I don't care how progressive you are. I don't care how many black friends you have. I don't care who your neighbors are. There is always a power differential underneath the surface. By just walking in the room and being white, by just opening your mouth and being white, there's a power differential there. So Ryan, you said these are the only parameters, right? But what they heard was based on this, who I am, what I represent, what I desire is oppressed, is on the margins. And I have to ask permission to be centered. When you didn't actually decenter them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important for us as a dominant culture to constantly have before us. We lost Jorge for a minute, but I want to get back to your idea about messiness, because I think that plays into John's question. In an ideal world, we might, always have, I don't know. In an ideal world, we would be a multicultural choir, singing a spiritual and drawing on resources around us. But we're not there yet. So does that mean we just stop singing spirituals?
Yeah. That's an important question. And my sister Alana, who unfortunately passed away, over a year ago, did a lot of work on decolonization. But my question to her always was, yes, but how do we engage the systemic piece in fractal ways? Meaning, how do we do it on our day-to-day? How do we do it in this conversation? So in this conversation, I am watching myself and I'm going like, we're all males. That was the first thing that I noticed. So I immediately go like, I make a note of it. I don't shame myself. I don't shame anybody around it. But I go like, oh, next time, already I go there. Because I believe that there is a way in which all of this work, all of this struggle needs to be done at all levels, needs to be done at the systemic level, but also at the smallest level possible. And that all of those pieces are going to be messy and are going to be imperfect. And that part of one of the problems that I've noticed is that the messiness sometimes drives particularly white folk to paralysis. So it's like, because I cannot do it perfectly, I'm just not going to do it at all, or it for others, including myself, it goes into the messiness can take us into nitpicking and just like, well, this wasn't good, and all of a sudden life, which is by its own nature messy and imperfect, it's just the way it is. And God in Jesus Christ, given that we're talking in a Christian context right now, comes into that. I mean, we're going to talk about cross-cultural journeys. That's a big cross-cultural journey, Pablo Sosa put it best on his villancico O del Dios Transformado when he speaks of God as a transgender person, coming into changing the nature. So I'm wondering, and this is only a thought that I have not even developed, but I'm just going to put it out there. I'm wondering, what can we learn for this conversation from transgender folk? Because they have to cross stuff and appropriate, using it with quotes, of course. And early on in their history, the feminist movement and the trans movement collided very strongly, as many of you know. All I'm saying is that even cherishing the messiness of it, letting it lead us into relationship and not into paralysis or nitpicking and destruction of each other, has high value for me.
Jorge. Oh, Jeffrey.
No, go ahead.
Jorge, it's really hard for us in America to deal with the messiness of the incarnation when we never sing about the messiness of the incarnation. I'm just going to say, I would lose my job if I went in and wanted to sing something like Heaven's Christmas Tree, right? Instead of singing Silent Night, or God forbid, having the processional be anything other than "Oh Come All Ye Faithful." You know, and so we sing about shit. We sing about stuff that happened culturally 300 years ago now. All right, we weren't there in the Victorian era. We weren't there in the whatever era we're singing from. We don't sing about incarnation in our own lifetime. It's not found in our hymnals. Or if it is, it's maybe one or two hymns. So we need to put the bloodiness and the fertilization and the hay back into the incarnation, because blood and water happens in rebirth, right? Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. I want to, our time is fleeting nigh. But I want to lift up two questions about messiness, and maybe we can just respond, because it seems to me they're sort of about messiness. We can respond quickly. One is from Cynthia. Cynthia asks, what do you think of recent efforts to play Lift Every Voice and Sing in addition to the Star Spangled Banner at events as a way to introduce the Black National Anthem? Is that inclusion or appropriation?
Manipulation.
Okay. Okay.
It's neither, both. It's manipulation.
I feel like it's performative.
We're asking for dismantling systemic racism, and you're going to give me some performance art.
Yeah, but I can offer you Lift Every Voice and Sing before the first football game. How about that? I think it's performative because it's easy.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So it's not performative in the sense that it's performing inclusion. It's performative in the sense that it is.
It's like not calling it a master bedroom anymore when you're doing a house.
Right. Okay.
It's like politicians speaking Spanish. You know, when, like hermano, I am. He was like, no.
Did you just?
No, not you. I mean, because we have a relationship. You can use that. You can use that. But when a politician who could care less about the Latino community, when it comes to election time, they learn like 3 words in Spanish. Come on, really?
I mean,
all right.
In this particular instance, okay, you're going to play Lift Every Voice and Sing. That's great. But your workforce, which is 75% Black, how can you ensure that they're not all going to get CTE? You know what I mean? That's hard to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait a minute, Jeffrey. Wait, hold on. I know you got to get to the next one, but just hold on. Because people need to understand that singing a Black national anthem before the quote-unquote white national anthem, because that's what it is. I mean, Francis Scott Key was a slave owner. And just look at all the verses we don't sing and what they say. To put one in front of the other is a literal slap in the face to all of the Negroes on the field who you paying high dollar for bread and circuses for. Okay.
Okay. Truth-telling this afternoon on Face to Face with Racism.
But the question still remains. It's easy to criticize something that somebody does, and I agree with what we have said. But and I think Ryan was helping us a little bit on this. It's like, yeah, but what's the alternative? Like, what would we say instead of doing that? Do this. That's one of the questions that I would offer to us, because it's easy to say that's not proper. That's not easy. It takes courage to say it, but we are saying it. But what is the alternative? Well, I would say, for example, for starters, that every time that you do a performative, in quotes, gesture, accompany it by a real change. So you say, and now, as part of our commitment, we have just raised the salaries and created equity in this particular way. And to celebrate that, we're going to sing this song.
Well, and I was talking to my I was talking to my black colleagues about this because I always want their take on something specifically dealing with the black race, and they said it's a good teachable moment because a lot of people are probably not aware of that song or that song exists, but it can't. That just can't be it. You know what I mean? It can't just be like, well, that's it, because that's almost the definition of appropriation we've talked about, which is like, okay, take this one thing. Now,
well, and, you know, I don't want to. We're running out of time, but what would it be like? I mean, Darnell asked, what would it be like instead of saying, okay, we're going to add the Black national anthem? What would it be like for us to abstain from singing the national anthem for a time? Not sing anything, right? To feel the pain of that emptiness and loss for us in the dominant culture, right? To say we must decenter for a while. And that doesn't feel very good. I don't like it, but come on, let's live into it. Okay, I got one more question I want to get to before we close, and that's from Teddy. And we get maybe just get a thumbs up or thumbs down. Teddy says, we have sung spirituals from the Tuskegee Choir series, and a few have been written in the, I guess, original dialect, Laud, Ana, Gunna, etc. I know it is original, however, to me it has always come across as demeaning for an all-white choir to sing it that way. Am I wrong?
Sing it that way.
Darrell says sing it that way.
Sing it that way.
Teddy, if William Dawson said sing it that way, we're going to sing it that way.
Yeah, that's right, Ryan. Well, I hope that
do it.
I hope that the moment was incorporated into an bigger educational piece. The problem with dialect and spirituals is that the rhythm of the piece is tied to the natural dialect that the enslaved Africans spoke. So when you start trying to sing natural English or as you think it's proper English, it will mess up the flow, the rhythmic flow of the piece. And also these are editorialized arrangements anyway, because spirituals are sung differently in Virginia as opposed to a plantation in Louisiana. They're not going to be sung the same way.
What? Black culture isn't monolithic?
Oh my goodness! Yes! You want to talk about decolonization? Let's talk about the demythalization of all of this.
All right, that's a topic for another day. Friends, our time has flown by. This is obviously a big topic, and we will continue the discussion. I appreciate all of your time and willingness to step into this messy space, right? Because these conversations are messy. I encourage you, those of you that are watching and listening online, to continue to live into these questions, to be comfortable with the messiness, especially if you're white. Be comfortable with that for a while. But most of all, be generous and gracious with yourself. Allow yourself to feel uncomfortable and know that's okay. Allow yourself to struggle with being decentered. Allow yourself to struggle with being messy and saying that's okay. Watch for our backstage conversation to drop later this week on Tuesday. And then join us again next week when our topic will be weaponizing whiteness. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on our next face-to-face discussion. Peace.